It was a late summer afternoon in an American city, the kind of day where the sun spread, a golden glow across the neatly trimmed lawns of the Central District Park, where wealthy families usually strolled with their dogs or sat under the shade of tall oaks, sipping iced lattes and talking about nothing more serious than fashion or their weekend plans, when suddenly the contrast of two worlds collided in a way that would stain memory like ink spilled across white silk. On a lonely wooden bench near the fountain sat a young man, his shoulders slightly slouched, his clothes torn in several places as though he had worn them through countless storms, his sneakers scuffed to the point that they seemed more like scraps than shoes, and his expression distant yet calm, like someone who had accepted the weight of life's hardships with quiet dignity. He looked every bit the image of poverty, the type of boy one might assume was homeless, perhaps a drifter, maybe even a beggar waiting for some coin to be tossed his way. But what no one around knew, not the joggers, not the children chasing pigeons, not even the old couple feeding crumbs to ducks, was that this young man was not poor at all, not weak, not broken, but in fact an officer from one of the most secretive branches of security, the ISI Police Intelligence Division, placed in this very district for a reason too complex for ordinary citizens to grasp, and the worn-out clothes he wore were not his shame but his armor, a disguise meant to blur his true identity. Yet destiny would test his patience in the form of three women who arrived together, their presence demanding attention like a sudden burst of neon light in the middle of a gray alley, each of them draped in expensive pink clothing that shimmered under the sunlight as if stitched from wealth itself, their hair styled with precision, their handbags carrying labels only the rich dared to flaunt, and their laughter, sharp and confident, echoed through the park like bells that rang not to please but to remind everyone else of their superiority. And as they walked in sync, heels clicking against the stone path, they noticed the boy on the bench, sitting alone, his elbows resting against his knees, eyes lowered as though he were meditating on something deeper than the shallow air around him. The tallest of the women, with blonde hair cut into a sleek bob and sunglasses large enough to cover half her face, wrinkled her nose and whispered loud enough for her friends to hear, "God, why do they even let people like that sit here? This park is for decent folks, not whatever that is." And her words dripped with disdain, fueled by the arrogance of someone who believed the city itself revolved around her polished shoes. The second woman, brunette with curls cascading over, her shoulders and lips painted in a shade of pink that matched her dress too perfectly to be accidental, chuckled and added, "Maybe he's waiting for crumbs, you know, like the pigeons. Maybe he's hoping someone will feel sorry for him and hand him $1. And the third, slightly younger, with an energy of entitlement that suggested she had never been told no in her life, folded her arms and said bluntly, "Well, I don't feel sorry. People like that just ruin the view. This is a high-class district. He shouldn't even be here." Their voices were loud, intentionally so, because their cruelty wasn't whispered gossip, but a performance, a way to display their status in front of each other, like predators circling prey, not because they were hungry, but because the act of circling proved their dominance. The boy, however, didn't respond at first. He remained still, his face unreadable, though deep within his mind a storm brewed, not of anger but of restraint, because training had taught him that words, no matter how sharp, could not slice through the discipline of silence. And so he let them laugh, let them sneer, let them stand in front of him as if they were queens looking down at a peasant. Then, breaking the tension, the blonde stepped closer, tapping her expensive heel against the stone right near the edge of the bench, and asked mockingly, "Hey you, why are you even sitting here? Don't you have a shelter to crawl back to? Or are you auditioning for the role of the park's new beggar?" Her friends burst into laughter, the kind of laughter that wasn't from genuine humor, but from the satisfaction of wounding someone weaker. And still the boy said nothing, only lifting his eyes for a brief second, his gaze calm yet unnervingly steady, the kind of look that unsettled those not used to being challenged without words. But they didn't notice, too lost in their self-created theater. "Answer her," the brunette demanded, waving her manicured hand as if brushing dust from the air. "Why are you here? Who gave you permission to sit on this bench in this district? Do you even know where you are?" The young officer shifted slightly, his lips parting, and his voice, when it came, was low and unshaken. "I'm just sitting. Is that a crime? Simple words, but heavy enough to silence them for a second, though pride quickly pushed back, and the youngest woman scoffed, "Yes, it's a crime, when people like you sit where you don't belong." This park isn't for beggars. It's for people who live here, who earn the right to breathe this air, not freeloaders. The words stung the air, sharper than intended, and nearby onlookers began to glance over, sensing a scene unfolding, the tension pulling like strings in a theater about to reveal its climax. The boy sighed softly, choosing once again not to retaliate because patience was his greatest weapon. But inside, a memory of his duty echoed. You are the guardian of this district, unseen yet ever present, and though they mock your disguise, your oath remains untouchable. Still, the cruelty of their assumptions pierced deeper than he wanted to admit, not because he cared for their insults, but because it reflected the blindness of society itself, the arrogance of wealth that judged, not by truth but by appearances, the way humanity often valued silk over soul, diamond over dignity. The women, emboldened by what they mistook for weakness, pressed further, circling him like vultures around a figure they assumed was dying, and the blonde smirked, leaning closer until her perfume, expensive, suffocating, clouded his senses. "Do you even have a home? Or do you sleep here at night, under the bench, waiting for scraps?" The boy's jaw tightened, not in anger, but in determination, because this humiliation was a test, and every test had an ending, though the women didn't know theirs was, approaching faster than they could ever imagine, because in this very district, their arrogance would soon collide with truth, and truth has a way of stripping pride bare, leaving nothing but silence where laughter once lived. The echoes of their mocking laughter still hung in the park like smoke after a fire, lingering in the air even after the boy had lowered his eyes again. And though on the surface he looked passive, almost indifferent, there was a storm rising inside him that only men of discipline know how to contain. The kind of storm that does not explode outward in rage but simmers inward, building a quiet intensity that waits for the perfect moment to strike. Yet fate was not content with silence. For the three women, fueled by the pride of their wealth and the blindness of their ignorance, decided to push their cruelty further, almost as if humiliating him gave them a sense of control, a temporary rush of superiority over someone they believed existed beneath their shoes. And so the blonde flicked her hair back, her diamond earrings catching the sunlight as she sneered, "I don't think you understand me, sweetheart. This park isn't a place for people like you. There are security rules. We don't just let anyone sit here, especially not people who look like, well, whatever you are." The brunette laughed again, the sound cold and hollow. "He probably doesn't even have an ID, imagine that. Sitting here like he owns the bench. Maybe he's a runaway, or worse, some junkie hiding from the cops." The younger woman crossed her arms, her eyes narrowed with contempt. "If he is hiding from the cops, they should just throw him out. He looks like trouble. People like that are the reason rich neighborhoods need extra police patrols. They spread filth, they scare children, they don't belong here." And in that single instant, the irony of her words burned like fire within the young man, because if only she knew, if only all of them knew, that the very cops she spoke of, the very law they believed existed to protect them from people like him, was none other than himself, the one they mocked, the one they tried to erase with insults. He was the silent guardian of this district, the officer whose presence ensured that criminals dared not set foot too deep into their polished streets. And yet here they were, spitting venom at the very shield that protected them, blind to the truth because they had judged him only by the cloth of his disguise. His silence, however, was not weakness. It was strategy. He had been taught in his training that sometimes the most powerful response to insult was not defense, but patience. Because time reveals all things, and truth needs no announcement. It only needs a moment to rise. But destiny would not make him wait long. For just as the women continued their cruel performance, a sudden commotion broke out at the far end of the park. A piercing scream that made every head turn, children stopping in their tracks. Pigeons, scattering into the sky, and the boy's eyes instantly sharpened, the mask of a beggar melting away to reveal the predator beneath the calm, his muscles tightening, his senses alive. as he spotted two men rushing through the park, rough-looking. Their movements hurried and suspicious, one of them clutching a stolen handbag, the other shoving bystanders out of the way. Chaos spread like wildfire as people gasped. Women clutched their children, joggers froze mid-stride, and the wealthy ladies who had been mocking him just moments before went pale with fear, their laughter dying on their lips as they realized crime had just slashed through their perfect bubble of privilege. The brunette gasped, her hands clutching her pearl necklace. "Oh my God, someone stop them." The blonde backed away, eyes wide. "Where's the security? Where are the police?" The youngest screamed, "They're coming this way." For a second, panic froze them, but for the boy on the bench, there was no hesitation, no pause for fear, only the immediate shift of duty, the instinct of a protector. He rose from the bench with a suddenness that made the three women stumble back, his posture no longer slouched but upright, commanding, the aura of weakness replaced by something terrifyingly strong. And as the thieves charged closer, one of them even laughing at the frightened crowd, the boy stepped directly into their path, his torn shirt flapping slightly in the summer breeze, but his eyes locked like steel, and his voice, low and steady, carried across the chaos. "Stop." The word cut sharper than a blade, freezing the thieves for a fraction of a second, long enough for the women to feel a chill crawl down their spines, because the voice that had once spoken meekly now carried authority, the kind of authority you couldn't fake, the kind that demanded obedience. But the thieves, arrogant in their crime, laughed it off, one of them snarling, "Move, bum, before I break you," and lunged forward, swinging his arm as if to shove the boy aside. But what happened next stunned the entire park into silence. For in a blur of motion, faster than eyes could follow, the boy twisted his wrist, locking the thief's arm in an iron grip, spun him sideways, and slammed him onto the ground with such force that the man cried out in pain, his stolen handbag tumbling across the grass. Gasps erupted. Children clung to their parents, and the second thief, shocked but not yet deterred, pulled a knife from his pocket, brandishing it with trembling fury. But the boy's eyes didn't flinch, didn't waver. He simply stepped forward, his movement smooth, calculated, the stance of someone trained in combat, and within seconds, he disarmed the man, striking his wrist, sending the blade spinning through the air, before sweeping his legs out from under him and pinning him to the ground with a knee pressed firmly against his back. The crowd erupted in stunned applause, cheers mixing with disbelief, people shouting, "Who is he?" And, "He's not just some guy." The three women stood frozen, their pink outfits trembling with their bodies, their mouths open but no words forming, as the realization began to dawn like a slow, cruel sunrise, that the man they had mocked, the one they had belittled as a beggar, was no ordinary figure, no stranger of shame, but a guardian cloaked in humility, a protector who had risked his cover to save them all. Nearby, the park security finally rushed in, too late to stop the crime, but not too late to witness the truth, and one of the officers saluted the young man, his voice carrying, "Respect, sir, suspects secured. Orders." The park froze in shock, the crowd gasping again, and all eyes turned to the boy, whose simple disguise of torn clothes now seemed almost like a royal robe of humility, because the word "sir" had cut through every assumption, every judgment, every insult the women had hurled at him, exposing the truth brighter than sunlight. He was the ISI police officer of this district, the hidden protector whose presence ensured their wealth, their children, their peace, and now his identity was undeniable. The women's faces drained of color, their arrogance shattering like glass under a hammer, because in that one moment, the roles had reversed. The beggar they mocked was the authority they were supposed to respect, and every cruel word they had thrown now echoed back against them like judgment from the sky. Guilt coiled in their stomachs, shame burned their cheeks, and the blonde finally stammered, We didn't know." But the young officer, calm as stone, only glanced at her, his eyes carrying no hatred, only a depth of disappointment, heavier than any insult. And with that silence, he turned away, ordering his men to secure the thieves, leaving the women drowning in the weight of their own humiliation, their laughter forever silenced, their pride crushed beneath the truth they had failed to see. The park had fallen into an almost holy silence after the officer's revelation. The thieves lying defeated and restrained by the arriving patrols, the crowd whispering in awe as if they had just witnessed a scene torn from some hidden legend. But for the three women who had mocked him only moments before, silence was not enough to drown the storm raging inside their hearts, because shame is louder than laughter when it finally arrives, and guilt cuts sharper than any insult ever could. They stood there in their expensive pink outfits, once symbols of wealth and superiority, now heavy chains dragging their pride into the dirt, and though the officer had not humiliated them in return, though he had not raised his voice nor lashed out with anger, the calm strength in his silence was far more devastating than fury, because it forced them to face themselves, to look into the mirror of their cruelty and see the ugliness they had tried to bury under makeup, diamonds and false confidence. The blonde swallowed hard, her sunglasses suddenly feeling like a mask she wanted to rip off, but even without them, she knew the world had already seen her for what she was, a bully wrapped in silk, and the brunette clutched her designer purse, tighter as if it could shield her from the truth that wealth cannot buy character, while the youngest, trembling and pale, whispered almost to herself, "He saved us. He saved everyone." And those words, though soft, carried the weight of revelation, because they all knew she was right. The man they had treated like a beggar had risked his life, had stepped forward when no one else dared, had faced knives and chaos while they had cowered and screamed. Their arrogance had blinded them, but truth had stripped them bare, leaving them as fragile as children standing before a storm. The officer, meanwhile, gave no speech, no self-defense, no grand declaration. He simply oversaw the transfer of the criminals, spoke quietly with his men, and ensured that the frightened families in the park were calm again, his every action dripping with the professionalism of someone who lived not for recognition, but for duty, not for applause, but for responsibility. And when his work was done, he turned to leave, his torn shirt rustling faintly in the breeze, his figure both humble and commanding at once, like a lion wearing the skin of a lamb. And it was in that moment that the three women, unable to bear the weight of their guilt, rushed forward together, their heels clicking desperately against the stone path, their voices breaking with urgency. "Wait! Please, wait!" The crowd, still buzzing with whispers, paused to watch, sensing a second drama about to unfold, and the officer stopped, his back to them, shoulders squared, waiting, not because he wanted to, but because discipline demanded. Patience even in moments of unnecessary emotion. The blonde was the first to speak, her voice trembling. We were wrong. We didn't know who you were. We shouldn't have said those things." The brunette added quickly, "We judged you by your clothes, by your appearance. We didn't see you, the real you." And the youngest, tears welling in her eyes, choked out, "We're sorry. Please, forgive us." Their words fell like fragile glass against the stone of his silence, shattering as soon as they hit, because forgiveness is not earned by desperation alone, but by truth. And truth demanded more than tears and apologies spoken in panic. The officer slowly turned to face them, his eyes calm, unflinching, the same eyes that had stared down criminals moments ago, and his voice, steady as a mountain, rolled over them like thunder. "It is easy to respect power, but the true measure of character is how you treat those you believe are powerless." The words hit them harder than any insult could have, because they knew he was right, because in their laughter and cruelty they had revealed the smallest, ugliest parts of themselves, and now those words carved into their conscience like stone. The blonde broke first, tears spilling beneath her sunglasses as she ripped them off and whispered, you're right. We failed." While the brunette shook her head as if denial could undo her actions. "We didn't mean it. It was just. But her excuses faded into nothing, because excuses could not erase humiliation, and the youngest collapsed onto the bench where he had once sat, burying her face in her hands, sobbing, "I thought I was better than you, but I'm not even half of you." The crowd watched in stunned silence, some nodding in agreement, others whispering, "They deserved that." And though no one openly mocked the women now, The judgment of 100 eyes weighed, heavier than their own arrogance ever had. The officer, however, did not linger in their suffering. He had no desire to prolong their shame, no interest in revenge. His duty was not to punish arrogance, but to protect innocence. And so he spoke once more, softer now, but still firm. Learn from this, because one day you may face someone who will not forgive. With that, he turned away again, walking toward the park gates, leaving them kneeling in their regret, leaving the crowd buzzing with admiration and whispers of legend, leaving behind a moment that would be retold in this district for years, a story of humility, justice, and the hidden guardian who walked among them unnoticed until the day truth demanded his revelation. The days that followed the park incident spread through the district like wildfire, carried not by official reports but by whispers, by retellings in coffee shops, by murmurs among families at dinner tables, by rumors that grew into legend. The story of a young man in rags who had been mocked as a beggar, humiliated as a nobody, only to reveal himself in the blaze of action as the hidden protector of the district, an ISI police officer who moved like a shadow and struck like lightning, humbling arrogance and protecting the very lives of those who had scorned him. And yet, for the officer himself, life returned to its silent rhythm. For glory was never his aim, recognition never his hunger. He returned to his duties as though nothing had happened, watching over the district quietly, appearing on the streets, at odd hours, fading into the crowds unnoticed, his identity still cloaked to most, because the disguise of humility was his strongest shield. But for the three women, the weight of their shame did not vanish so easily. For each time they looked at themselves in the mirror, they did not see wealth or beauty or privilege. They saw the reflection of cruelty, the echo of their mocking, laughter, and the memory of his steady eyes delivering words that cut deeper than any sword. It is easy to respect power, but the true measure of character is how you treat those you believe are powerless. The blonde, once the loudest in her pride, found herself hesitating before speaking in social circles, her arrogance cracking each time she remembered his silence, and her friends noticed the shift, asking why she no longer ridiculed strangers in the park. But she never answered, too ashamed to admit the truth. The brunette, whose laughter had once dripped venom, now found it hollow when she tried, each giggle interrupted by the image of him twisting a thief to the ground with effortless strength, and she would fall quiet, lost in thought, questioning what respect meant. The youngest, however, suffered most of all, for her youth had fueled her arrogance, but her youth also magnified her guilt. She would wake in the night, replaying her words. People like that ruin the view. They don't belong here, and the shame was a wound that would not close. Their world of silk and diamonds had been shattered, and though no one in their elite circles spoke openly about the humiliation, everyone knew, for eyes had witnessed, and whispers are a currency that spreads faster than fire. Still, none of them dared to face him again, not until weeks later, when fate once more wove their paths together in a way none could have predicted. It was an evening of rain, the streets slick with silver reflections of neon signs, when the three women, returning from an upscale dinner, found themselves in a narrow alleyway blocked by a sudden traffic jam, their driver unable to move the car forward. They decided to step out, clutching their umbrellas and complaining about the inconvenience, when suddenly a group of men emerged from the shadows, eyes gleaming with predatory hunger, voices sharp with menace. These were not petty thieves like in the park, but hardened criminals, the kind who thrived on fear, and their target was clear. Wealthy women, alone, vulnerable in the rain. The blonde's breath caught in her throat. The brunette whispered in terror, "Not again. Oh God, not again." And the youngest clung to her purse, trembling, for they knew they were defenseless, their wealth useless, their status meaningless before men who saw them as prey. One of the criminals sneered, stepping closer. "Pretty clothes, pretty jewelry. Hand it over, and maybe you walk away." The women froze, panic choking them, but then, like a ghost summoned by destiny, he appeared again, stepping out from the curtain of rain, wearing the same tattered clothes as before, blending with the night as if he had always been there, waiting. His presence was quiet, but it was enough to make the criminals pause, sensing something unsettling in his calm stance. The blonde gasped, her heart twisting with recognition. "It's him," the brunette whispered, almost in prayer. "Please, let it be him." And the youngest, eyes wide with a flood of relief and guilt, whispered, "He came back." The rain-soaked night became the turning point for the three women. For when dawn broke the following morning, they awoke not as the same arrogant figures who once strutted through the district draped in pink silk and false pride, but as women haunted by the weight of their choices, women who carried the echo of his voice inside their chests like a ghost whispering judgment with every heartbeat, women who could no longer look at luxury without remembering the taste of humiliation. And as the city moved on with its usual rhythm, cars streaming through polished boulevards, coffee shops filling with chatter, and children laughing in playgrounds, inside their hearts, silence reigned, silence filled with guilt, with self-questioning, with a desperate hunger to change. Yet change is never easy, especially for those who have lived long in arrogance. Because every step toward humility feels like walking barefoot over broken glass, every memory of cruelty replaying like shards cutting deeper into the soul. And so the blonde, the brunette, and the youngest each wrestled with their demons in private, hiding behind smiles in public but collapsing into tears when alone, asking themselves why fate had chosen him to be their mirror, why destiny had placed the ISI officer in their path not once but twice, shattering their illusions and forcing them to see the truth of who they were. Meanwhile, the officer himself continued his duty in silence, unseen by most, walking the streets in his disguise, his eyes always scanning, always watching, his heart neither hardened by their cruelty nor softened by their apologies, for his oath was beyond personal emotion. His mission was to protect the district, not to seek validation from those he saved. And though the women's guilt weighed heavily on them, he carried none of it, because he had long since learned that the world will always judge by appearance, and the measure of a man is never found in how the world sees him, but in how he chooses to act when no one sees it all. Yet destiny was not finished with its weaving. For weeks later, on a golden afternoon much like the one when it all began, the district was struck by something far greater than petty thieves or lurking criminals. An organized threat, a coordinated plan by men who sought to strike fear at the very heart of the city, a group of armed radicals who had slipped past the usual defenses, waiting for the perfect moment to make themselves known. And that moment came during a weekend festival in the Central Plaza, where families gathered, vendors sold food, and children danced under banners of celebration, unaware that danger crouched in the shadows ready to pounce. The officer knew. He had felt the tremor days before, whispers carried through underground channels, signs in the air that only a trained mind could notice. And so he had prepared, watching silently, blending into the crowd in his tattered clothes as always, waiting for the strike that everyone else believed would never come. It was there, amid the laughter of children and the music of joy, that the radicals revealed themselves, armed and shouting, chaos exploding like thunder in the plaza, families screaming, vendors abandoning their stalls, panic spreading like wildfire. And in that chaos among the fleeing crowd, the three women once again found themselves trapped in the storm of fate, clutching each other in terror as the armed men pushed through the plaza, firing shots into the air, demanding obedience. Through fear, the blonde trembled, her voice breaking. "Not again. Not again." The brunette clutched her arm, whispering, "Where is he? Please, where is he?" And the youngest, her eyes scanning desperately through the crowd, cried out, "He's here. I know he's here. He always comes." And they were right. Through the storm of panic, through the sea of terrified faces, he moved, quiet but unstoppable, his eyes locked on the men who threatened his district, his disguise still upon him but his aura unmistakable. And when the first radical turned his weapon toward a group of cowering families, the officer's body surged forward faster than a heartbeat, colliding with the man, disarming him before the crowd even realized what had happened. And as the weapon clattered to the ground, he swung it out of reach and turned to face the others, his stance unshaken, his voice commanding. "This ends here," the radicals snarled, surprised to be challenged by someone who looked like nothing more than a vagrant, but their arrogance, like that of the women before them, blinded them to the truth of who stood before them, and they lunged forward, weapons raised, only to find themselves dismantled one by one in a storm of precision strikes, each move of his body a masterclass in discipline and power, each motion a reminder that true strength requires no announcement, no costume of wealth, no approval from the world. And as the plaza erupted in awe, families cheering through tears, children clapping with innocence even as danger dissolved before their eyes, the three women once again felt their hearts shatter, because this time it was not just their lives he had saved, but the lives of an entire district, and they knew beyond doubt that destiny had placed them in his story, not for their comfort, but for their transformation. When the dust settled and the radicals were restrained by the arriving units, the officer stood silently in the center of the plaza, breathing steady, his torn clothes soaked in sweat, his eyes scanning for any further danger, and the people of the district, wealthy, poor, young, old, looked at him not as a beggar, not as a stranger, but as the guardian he had always been. The three women, trembling and weeping, pushed through the crowd, falling at his feet, their voices breaking as they cried, "Forgive us. Forgive us for who we were, for what we said, for the cruelty we showed you. We will never be the same. Again, we swear it." The crowd hushed, watching the moment unfold, and the officer looked down at them, his face calm, unreadable, his silence louder than their sobs. And finally he spoke, his words carrying through the plaza like a sermon, etched into stone. "Do not bow before me. Bow before the truth. For I am nothing and yet everything, only because I chose to serve." And with that, he walked away once more, fading into the crowd, leaving behind not fame nor wealth, but a legacy etched into the souls of those who had witnessed him, a legacy that would haunt, heal, and transform forever. The revelation did not come in whispers, but in thunder. For weeks after the plaza incident, when the dust of chaos had finally settled and the city returned to its fragile rhythm, the government convened a press conference unlike any the district had ever seen, cameras flashing, reporters leaning forward with hungry eyes, officials standing in polished rows, and in the center of it all stood the man they once mocked. The man they once dismissed as nothing more than a ragged stranger. Yet now he wore no disguise, no mask of poverty, for the world was about to learn what only destiny had known all along. And as the spokesman cleared his throat, the words rang like a strike of lightning. The man who defended this district, who risked his life against the radicals and whose service spans decades unseen, is not a stranger but one of our finest, Colonel of the ISI. Gasps erupted across the room, shock rippling through every corner of the nation as cameras turned, snapping the face of the man who had chosen anonymity over fame, humility over recognition, service over applause. And in that moment, the three women, seated far in the back, felt their souls collapse under the weight of truth, tears spilling uncontrollably as memories of their arrogance crashed against the reality of who he truly was. The man they insulted, the man they dismissed, was not just greater than they imagined. He was the silent guardian of the land itself. After the ceremony ended, trembling, they pushed through the crowd, desperate, their breaths unsteady, their pride shattered beyond repair, until at last they stood before him, their knees weak, their voices breaking as one after another confessed, "Forgive us, for we were blind, for we were cruel, for we were small before a man who was great. Forgive us, Colonel." The air grew still, all eyes upon him, the world waiting to see whether he would condemn or absolve, whether his silence would cut deeper than their shame. Yet his gaze, steady and unshaken, softened not with pity, but with a strength they could never understand. And when he finally spoke, his words rolled like thunder, yet soothed like rain. "I already forgave you the moment you mocked me, for your cruelty was never my burden. It was your own chain. Today I release you from it. Walk free, but never forget. Respect is not given to faces, to clothes, or to wealth. It is given to truth, to service, to sacrifice." And with those words, he turned away, leaving them sobbing in the silence of their own redemption, for they had been taught the final lesson. True greatness does not need recognition. True power does not seek revenge, and true men of honor forgive, not because they are weak, but because they are strong enough to carry what others cannot.